So they're not learning from 90% fail rate. Let's keep going, lads. This seems like nothing makes sense. Deep down, I think that even if torturing animals to death might find a cure for cancer, I still think it's ethically wrong because we have no right. What do you think? What do you think of that?
I think that your query is a very common one. And I think it's something that everybody goes through as they're growing up, as they go to college. At some point in their life, they're going to have these thoughts. Now, historically, humans have had many thoughts about the world, the universe, the stars, and that's why science was invented, so that we would have a good way of figuring out the answers. And we have figured out the answer to your moral dilemma. In the 16, 17, 1800s, we learned quite a bit about the human body from studying other mammals. I mean, sheep, cows, pigs, humans, we're all kind of developed in the same way. We have hearts that pump blood. We have lungs that oxygenate the blood. So to the first approximation, maybe we could study diseases and how drugs react to humans by studying these other animals. Unfortunately, science has come a long way, and we now know that you can't do that. So this ethical dilemma disappears. Studying animals is not going to make the drug supply safer. It's not going to make studying diseases easier. There is scientific merit. I mean, you can certainly learn things about frogs if you study frogs, but it's not going to translate to humans.
Yeah. I think that that stops some people in their tracks, because to torture animals to death, I think for any reason, it's not a good enough reason. Right? And then to find out that actually it doesn't even work, it's a no-brainer. So why does it carry on? Why are there still horrendous experiments on animals?
There's two short answers. The first short answer is it's the status quo. And look at politics today. Usually the person that wins is the person who has the best lobbyist in the government, okay? So the status quo is very difficult to supplant. Number two, there's just a lot of money in it. There are billions and billions of dollars in this. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of companies that this is how they make a living. Okay, you combine those two things, you don't really need anything else. Money and the status quo.
So basically, animal experimentation makes people money and they want it to carry on. Now, do they know it doesn't work, or are some of them fooled themselves? Are some of those people victims of propaganda and hope?
There haven't been any scientific studies that we could quote to address your question. But based on my experience, it kind of breaks down in the following way. When you're a young college student or a PhD student, you believe all the propaganda that they serve to you. Now, by the time you get into your 30s and early 40s, kind of in the middle of your career, then you've been around the block enough to know that some of this stuff is just nonsense. But if you're in your 30s or 40s, your career is now what you do. You're not going to go back to school and become an engineer. You're not going to go back to school and do something else. So you're really between a rock and a hard place. Now you have a mortgage, now you have 3 kids, you have expenses. And you're just now getting to where you're actually making some money off of animal experimentation. So I think that's how it goes. The people who are at the upper echelons of the animal experimentation industry, they're smart. I know most of them, and they know darn good and well what's going on. And they want the money, they want the prestige, they want the status quo. They do not want change.
Most normal people say, no, you shouldn't torture an animal for shampoo or mascara, right? Well, they get that. But they go, oh, it might cure cancer. And they go, oh, okay, well, that is different. I don't want to know about it, but I just find a cure for cancer and don't tell me what these things are over. But if you knocked on their door and said, can we just torture your dog? And they go, no, you psychopath. So there's a hypocrisy there as well with people. And I think the general public believing that this is worthy and works and honourable, and we need to save your family, it aids them, doesn't it?
For hundreds of years, society has accepted the maxim that animal experimentation is a necessary evil. So that is what everyone who defends it has said. People have admitted this. This isn't new. It's been around for probably half a millennia. So this is well known. So what I and my research partner, Professor Shanks, have done is we've taken the necessary out of the necessary evil. It is not necessary. Not only is it not necessary, it's counterproductive. I can list discovery after discovery after discovery that were made despite research in animals, despite the results that the animal model gave. The human model gave exactly the opposite response, and we now have treatments for cancer. We now have treatments for a host of diseases that, had we believed the animal model, we would not have.
Do people pretend these things are working and necessary because they know they get funding?
Oh, yes, absolutely. When you talk about basic research that is done in academia, what a PhD will usually do is he'll pick one animal and one disease process, and he will study that animal and that disease process. He'll establish a reputation, and then he'll get millions of dollars over the course of however many years to study that animal model.
But what's in it for him if
his salary? That's how he gets
so
paid.
It's just a salary, even though you might know that you're not getting the results and you're torturing all these animals and you're paying someone. I still don't get the point. I don't get the point.
The other thing that you should realize about this is that their ego is directly tied to all of this. Most people who go into animal experimentation are not stupid people. They could have gone to medical school had they wanted to, but they wanted to search for new facts. They wanted to learn more about the universe. That in and of itself is laudable. But by the time they get to middle age, they see that this isn't working. They see the man behind the curtain, and then they have an ethical decision to make. But when they first start, they want to learn new things. They have an ego that's being fed because the more papers they publish, the more fame they get, the more places they get to go. Their salary is going to rise steadily. The university is going to love them because a lot of the money in animal experimentation goes directly to the university. Directly to the university. Some of the big universities in the US will make $100 to $200 million US per year off of animal experimentation. Per year.
But who's saying, okay, you've wasted millions and millions of dollars and you've got no results, this isn't working? Who's saying that? No one's saying that.
The only people that are saying that don't work for the university. All right, so I was in academia for 3 years. I taught at 2 different medical schools. I published in the medical literature, and I came to these conclusions, and I had 2 choices. If I had stayed in academia, I would not have been allowed to voice my opinion on these things. So I got out of academia and I started working full-time on what I do now. But I have had many academicians say to me, Dr. Greek, we believe you. We know that what you're saying is true. We've experienced this firsthand. But if I sign your petition or if I come on your board of directors, I'll be fired. So this is about money, and it's about a lot of money.
Okay, so to what lengths do they go then, these people? Is there a range?
There's a huge range, and it goes all the way from really 0, being non-invasive and non-intrusive and non-painful, all the way up to 10, which is gratuitous and as much pain as you can possibly imagine. Now, there are ways that animals can be used in research that are very, very viable. For example, if you're a veterinarian, and you want to see which diet, which food works better on English bulldogs, then you can take a group of English bulldogs that belong to your clients, and you can separate them into groups, and you can feed them different foods, and that's perfectly acceptable. That's acceptable scientifically, it's acceptable ethically, and so on and so on. But the reason that animal experimentation is sold to society is because of the predictive value for drugs. Is this drug going to be safe and effective in my grandmother, in my child, in my sister? And that's where animal models fail, and fail conclusively. We have proven every year for 30 years that they fail. And the way we have done this is that 90% of drugs that pass the tests in animal models fail in human clinical trials. You would actually be better off just tossing a coin. Heads, the drug goes to market, tails, it doesn't. It's really hard to get worse than a 90% failure rate.
See, that's incredible. Okay. So the most lucrative thing for these animal experiments is the least effective.
That's right. And the thing that causes the most injury, the thing that causes the most pain, the thing that causes the most suffering is the one thing, arguably, that just flat out doesn't work. There's a lot of ways that animals can be used in science that are functional, they work. If you want to find out what the general contours are of mammalian anatomy, you can dissect a cat. It works. Ethically, I'm not in favor of it, but scientifically, it is functional, all right? And there's a lot of alternatives to dissecting a cat or to killing any animal for a high school biology class.
Yeah.
But those things are not why animal experimentation persists. There's a lot of alternatives to them. We don't need to do them. But when animal experimenters are really pinned against the wall, they will always say, it's your dog or your child.
Right. Okay. Now, I hear that a lot, that whenever I tweet about pointless animal experiments, people say, hey, well, I hope you never take an aspirin then.
Aspirin was developed long before animal testing. That's a horrible example.
So I'm slightly worried that I've got a scientific bias in that ethically, I've already decided that torturing animals for any reason is wrong. Right? And you seem to be confirming this for me with facts, which is great. But maybe I should play devil's advocate.
Oh, sure.
And push you, and I'll try and find a reason why there should be animal experiments.
No, that's what science is all about, is falsifying your opinion. You shouldn't seek confirmation of your opinion or your hypothesis. You should seek to falsify your hypothesis.
Exactly.
That's what science is.
Exactly.
So please, yes.
Okay, we haven't done all the experiments yet, and there's some animals left. Let's just keep going, because we might find a cure for something.
That's very similar to saying there's a lot of plants and animals in nature. Some we haven't even discovered. We discover several hundred new species of beetles and other bugs and plants every year. But no one says, maybe this is the one that was created by God. They say, oh, look, this evolved from that. And this one is going to evolve into something else. Evolution is a theory. A theory is one of the most powerful tools that science has. And once Darwin said, this evolved from that, that settled it. We don't go looking in the material universe for things that were created. It all evolved.
Okay, you brought up God. Now, I'm an atheist, but sometimes I want someone in charge. So if these experiments are pointless and they're torturing animals for no reason and they don't help, and someone's holding this information back as a money-making scheme and putting out propaganda and fooling everyone and giving them false hope that this torturing this beagle might save your grandmother, right? Who's in charge?
Unfortunately, the people who are actually in charge are the animal experimenters themselves. Number one, they have the support of the university chancellor or president because a lot of money comes into the university because of them. They are the big boys on campus. They're the ones that bring in the most money to the university. The people who do the peer review in order to see who gets which grant, they are also animal experimenters. Most of the people who apply for grants are animal experimenters. The people who are the editors of the journals that publish the animal experiments are animal experimenters. So what you're left with is the people who do speak out are the ones who, like me, might have a lot of knowledge of the subject, but no one is going to listen to me. No one is going, I can't go to my congressman in the US and say, hey, I've got science that proves this wrong. Mainly because my congressman doesn't know how to spell science.
So, hold on. So the people who do the peer review are on the side of the animal experimenters.
They are the animal experimenters. Most of the committees that give away grants are composed 90, 95, even 100% of people who do animal experiments. And they themselves are also applying for those same grants to do more experiments on animals. So the deck is stacked. There's not a third party out there that is unbiased. Again, Congress in the United States and Parliament in the UK, they're the people who are ultimately in charge. But I don't know how things are in the UK, but in the US, most of our Congress people are not scientifically literate. So they're really not good judges for what should be funded in science and what should not. And all the people that they talk to have a vested interest in animal experimentation.
How do you get a peer review with an unbiased body who's in charge and powerful enough to go, it's been blown out the water, the game's up?
So in the UK, what some groups are trying to do now is we're trying to get a hearing, if you will, that's endorsed by Parliament and that is judged by scientists from all walks of life, physicists, mathematicians, chemists, biologists, and so forth, who do not have a vested interest in animal experimentation. And the pro-animal experimentation people can write a position paper. I can write a position paper, and then we can give it to the experts and let the experts decide. If I'm wrong, I'm happy to say I'm wrong. I don't think I am.
But hold on though, these people who took the money from presumably people who make drugs, who...
Actually, most of it is from taxpayers.
Really?
Yes. Actually, what is happening, Ricky, is this is fraud.
Yeah.
Okay, in its purest form. Fraud is, you're going to give me some money today and I'm going to give you a product tomorrow. Only tomorrow never comes. That's what's happening. Animal experimenters are promising cures for cancer, they're promising cures for Alzheimer's, and even if we can't get a cure, we'll get more knowledge so that someday we can have a cure. Only tomorrow never comes. So animal experimenters want to have it both ways. When they lecture in front of society or when they go to the government to talk to them about animal experimentation, they sell what they do based on cures for cancer, cures for brain cancer in children, and so on and so forth. But when they publish something in the peer-reviewed literature, they only claim to have advanced science. In other words, we did something to this dog and we learned something and that's it, it's over. Okay? Their claims are very modest when they're talking to their own people, but when they're talking to society, they have these grandiose plans for what the research they're conducting is going to do. So they're lying.
But what if, playing devil's advocate, said, okay, we haven't found out anything yet that works, but that doesn't mean it'll never work. Our next experiment on our next creature might just cure your grand's cancer.
And that's what they've been saying for about 100 years.
You could do a billion experiments on a billion mice for 100 years, and you could give that mouse every disease and cure every disease in that mouse, and it means nothing when it's applied to a human being.
It means nothing. Now, if you did what you suggested, you would probably find a couple of mice along the way that reacted to a drug or a disease or something the way humans did. Okay, that's just statistics. I mean, if you do anything enough times, one time it's bound to work. Okay, but right now we've done retrospective studies about a new drug that did really well. And what we find is that it was tested on 10 or 12 species, 3 of whom died from the drug, 3 of whom had no reaction at all, one of whom really did respond exactly like the human, and the other 5 had liver side effects, kidney side effects, whatever. So how do you know in advance which one of these 12 species is going to mimic the human response? You don't. So that's why I say, if anything good has ever come of animal experimentation, it's been due to luck. That's it.
Torturing an animal is wrong. There's no reason to torture an animal, right? But when you're confronted with all this propaganda and you understand that one person sitting at home thinking, if they do a couple of these experiments on a beagle, I might live an extra 10 years. I get that. I get that hope. I get the confusion. I get it, right? But then to hear that it doesn't work and they're being conned and that will never save them and 1 million animals will be tortured to death, it blows my mind. It blows my mind. And I can't believe that everyone knows that and hides it. It must be a small percentage.
You know how many leaked memos we have about animal modeling? Almost every single journal that has ever been published about science, scientific research, and medicine, there's a whistleblower that comes out and says, hey guys, we have to address this. Animal modeling isn't working. Now that's how strong the animal experimentation industry is. We've had whistleblowers for years. We've had vice presidents of drug companies. We've had people who were the director of the NIH. A former director of the NIH came out and said, we all drank the Kool-Aid on animal models. Okay? He retracted his statement about a week later when the National Association for Biomedical Research sent him a letter chastising him and telling him he better reverse his position, which he did. So there is a huge vested interest group, there is a huge lobby, and those are the people in charge, and they do not have a conscience.
So they're not learning from 90% fail rate. Let's keep going, lads. This seems like nothing makes sense.
So let me address something just very, very minimally tangential to what you just said. There's a huge money aspect in this. And a lot of people have criticized me because they say, well, he's just spinning a conspiracy theory. And that's absolutely false. A conspiracy theory in our day, the way we use the term, it means there's a few people at the very top that are profiting from something and they're fooling everyone else. And so they're committing a conspiracy, literally a conspiracy. What I'm saying is that there are millions of people involved in this, and every single one of them has a vested interest in it. All right?
Yeah.
That really is a conspiracy. That's a conspiracy as defined by law, okay? Just because a lot of people are involved in it doesn't mean that it's not happening, and it doesn't mean that the information that I'm trying to get out is false.
So do you think in 100 years' time, people will look back on us like we look back and laugh at doctors who put leeches down our pants and drilled holes in our head to let out the demons?
What this is going to amount to is, can you convince the people, the vested interest groups, mainly the drug companies, that they can actually make more money if they abandon the animal model? If they start human testing, which is very safe, very early in the drug discovery process, then they will have more good drugs that come to market, they'll have fewer bad drugs that make it to market, and their profit will soar. So if you can invest the really big money, and that's mainly the pharmaceutical groups, that the current paradigm doesn't have a chance of working, then yeah, in 100 years we'll definitely do that.
How do you get your peer group to look at this and make their decision?
There's one very big impediment to getting other scientists to look at that, and that is the 3 R's. Right now, most scientists, especially in the biology community, think that this thing that's called the 3 R's is the way that animal experimentation should go for the next century. They want to reduce the number of animals used. They want to refine the experiments so the animals don't suffer as much. And eventually they want to replace animals with some other modality that works. And going hand in hand with that is what are called alternatives. So there's a cottage industry that has grown up to try and find alternatives to animals that are used in research and testing. The fallacy is the animal experiments are not going to accomplish giving you a cure for cancer. They're not going to accomplish telling you whether the drug is safe and effective. You need human-based studies. The 3Rs community is sold by both animal experimentation groups and so-called animal protection groups. The NC3Rs, many of the charities that you have in the UK, the bigger, wealthier charities like the RSPCA, they all endorse the 3Rs. Well, so do the animal experimenters. Their science departments have either not looked at this issue as deeply as they should, in which case they shouldn't be getting a salary, or they're complicit. And because a lot of the people who are on the science boards of these big organizations are themselves former animal experimenters, they have a huge bias.
I just want to clarify one thing. With a 90% failure rate of animal experiments, what you mean is that actually, when the experiments actually worked in animals, then 90% of those failed in humans.
Yes, that's exactly right. And there's no way you can know which drug is going to be one of the 10% as opposed to one of the 90%. And
Yeah.
let me give you an example of that. When thalidomide was tested, some of the animals had some birth defects, and most of the animals did not have any birth defects. Okay, so then they went back and they looked at just about every drug that causes birth defects, and they looked at all the different species and so on and so on. And what they found was that there was just no way that you could tell in advance. I mean, maybe a monkey responded to this drug with a birth defect and no other animal did, and that drug also caused birth defects in humans. Maybe another drug, no species responded like humans in terms of having a birth defect. So you cannot figure out preemptively which drug is going to mimic humans. The reason we have not had another thalidomide is not because we can figure out which drugs cause birth defects. The reason we haven't had another thalidomide is because physicians only prescribe really old, really well-known drugs to pregnant women.
Right.
We just don't prescribe the new drugs because we don't have a clue what they're going to do to pregnant
So the ones
women.
that work are human tested, really.
That's exactly right. They've been human tested for decades and decades, and we know that they don't cause birth defects.
And when people say, oh yeah, but all the drugs you get from your chemist, aspirin, they've been tested on animals, they've actually been tested, because all drugs are tested on animals, and they could have been tested on us first, we could have found them in a tree bark, and then we go, and now let's test it on a penguin.
Exactly.
It was already working. It was nothing to do with the animal test when it worked.
Exactly. To go back to my birth defect comments, if we shelved every single drug that caused a birth defect in some animal species, we would have no drugs. Zero. Because every single drug does something bad to some species, okay? So if you want a drug for arthritis, if you want a drug for heart disease, and so on, I guarantee you I can find 10 different species that drug will have horrible side effects in. So when those drugs eventually go to human clinical trials and 90% of them fail, there's no way you can figure out prospectively which is the 1 out of 10 that's going to be all right.
So to clarify even more, I'd hate people to think that when you say 90%, you mean, and these 10% were great, and that's what gave us all the cures for cancer.
Oh, no.
It's the opposite of that.
It's the opposite. The drugs that we have that work really, really well today, we got those despite animal testing.
And in fact, the results from animal testing, if they were to be used, they're less than random. It's better.
That's right.
It would be better never to test anything. We'd have better results.
We'd have better results. You could flip a coin and you would come up 50-50 as opposed to 90-10.
Well, this seems to be a no-brainer. This is incredible.
It is a no-brainer unless your salary depends on it.